Ooh, I'm trying not to burp right now. Welcome to Bonehead.
Yes, welcome. We have put the mat out for you, and now we want you to walk on in and have a good time. Don't touch anything and wear your mask.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Maybe we should do an episode where we all wear masks. I've been told it would help our ratings.
Somebody posted a meme, and I thought it was pretty funny. I don't have well, I do have breasts, but not the kind that I need a bra. Well, I don't wear a bra. But someone said taking your mask off as soon as you get home is now the new taking your bra off as soon as you get home. And I'd say that's probably about right. I know by the time I'm done at Kroger, I'm ready to take the damn thing off.
Yeah.
Rather than wear mask during the podcast, can we just play the theme song to the 80s cartoon Mask?
No.
Mask?
It's a pretty awesome theme song, Joe.
Is it?
No one, Joe, knows what. I know what it is. Joe's holding out for Jim because she is truly
outrageous.
Truly outrageous.
She is.
By the way, that's probably the worst performing adaptation of an 80s cartoon ever into a modern movie, right? Has anybody seen that? Jim.
I saw 10 minutes of it. I didn't even know Juliette Lewis was in it until I was flipping through and saw it. 10 minutes of it.
The people I know who are diehard Jim fans, and I do know a few, said, well, what is this? So
Phil has taken over your wife's Facebook feed, James. I just want you to know he keeps commenting on her sex swing.
Well, let me look at it.
Well, don't do it.
You do it while we're recording.
No, let's do it now.
Good God, man.
So this episode is about sex swings and our favorite ones in film history.
No, it's about it's about Mary Shelley's best adaptation of Egyptian history. Dracula.
Huh.
Good night.
Been writing that in quarantine for 4 days.
It just came off the top of my head, so
you can't tell. All right, so we're talking about Dracula.
Let's hear some of your highlights of comedy there.
Well, we're not.
Even when we don't see each other for 2 weeks, we still don't like each other.
Now, man, we're not talking about Dracula per se, right? We're starting with the history of Dracula.
Well,
which means it comes before Dracula.
Yeah, we're going to do a two-parter. One is going to be a little bit about the history of movies, and then we're going to do the movies that we like. So this has been on the board for quite a while. We another jab at Chad. We've been trying to get it done, and Chad's just been stopping it in the works the whole time.
You know it is a joke. It is an ongoing joke as Joe thinks it's funny.
I don't know that it's funny.
It's not.
It's right. Well, it's right up there with Egyptian Mary Shelley.
But the truth is, in terms of monsters, in terms of universal monsters, Dracula and vampires in general are my least favorite.
But they're the most.
I want to say they're least favorite. I want to say I might like him less than zombies. I've never understood the massive. I don't know. It's close. I just don't understand the mass appeal of Dracula and vampires.
Vampires.
What is so fascinating about somebody drinking something that tastes like a penny?
Have you ever ate a penny?
Blood?
Have you ever ate a penny?
No.
It's delicious. You hypocrite. You talk about something. That's like me comparing something to, I don't know, caviar. I ain't never had it. Docky Stigo ain't never had ice cream, but he figures he went like it.
But why are they so popular? Because clearly that's the most popular monster of all time.
And that's my question to you all. Why is it so popular? Because Frankenstein, the Mummy, even the Mummy. Well, maybe not the Mummy. I don't know.
You want to know why? Honestly, why?
Most of the Mummy stuff people remember from the sequels.
Yeah.
But you want to know why they're the most popular?
Why?
Go for it.
Well, Chad, I know this may come as a shock to you, and you may not have as much experience as some others, but sex!
But again,
people say that, but I don't know if I agree.
No. If you look at the history of vampirism, it is closely linked to sex. Matter of fact, a lot of them were, until Bram Stoker and a few other people mess with the formula. But originally, a lot of the mythology that we now associate with vampirism were linked to women. And it was women, the story of the succubus, the story of it was women trying to, of course,
Or would it make jokes or just roll on from succubus?
I mean, whatever lights your cookie.
No, I don't have anything funny about it. Go ahead.
My dad used to say that.
It's tragedy. It's all just tragedy.
Oh, so we're talking about my high school.
That is a weird turn of phrase. lights your cookie?
I think it was my dad, hated whatever, and so he just made up whatever lights here. He combined two things. He pulled a Biff before Biff pulled Biffs.
What is the squeaking thing going
That's
on
his
at your
dog,
house?
That's my
Did you
dog.
get a hamster?
No, we moved the dog, and now the dog is in a new place, and the dog is fine being in a new place as long as I'm in the room with the dog in the new place, but I'm not in the room with the dog in the new place. I'm down here filming this, so the dog
I can't
is
tell if
letting
it's
me
a
know.
bird in a cage or the little hamster in the wheel, but it doesn't sound like a dog.
My dog is a real wuss. I don't know how else to say that. Like, her whines are just epic. It's like having Fran Drescher for a pet, really.
Oh my god.
Hey.
The
You're
most
welcome.
annoying voice of any human being ever.
I like Fran
Have
Drescher.
you
I
heard
think
yourself
she's
talk, Joe?
Oh,
I
yeah.
honestly, I don't sound like me when I have to listen to me go back and do this. But yeah, it's still not Fran Drescher.
Poll's still out on that one.
Try not to smoke it. Back to Dracula.
Back to Dracula.
So Dracula, the mythos we tend to associate with it, the sucking blood, all of that stuff, obviously that built up over time. And it comes from a couple different places, going back to Greek mythology and Roman mythology and all of that stuff. And so a couple of things that I thought I'd kick off with, because I know I like folklore. It's
no, take your time with your point.
It keeps
dramatic
me company.
pauses in these shows.
So
get on. Well, first, should we put you in your rocker? Get your corncob pipe, little straw hat, and rock back and forth.
I can't. I'm not allowed to have corncob pipes anymore. We'll get a harsher rating from the TVMA people. But no. So a couple of the Look now. I was watching something with the kids, and it was something that was recorded in the '90s, and it now says, the TV rating, and it says representations of smoking. So,
oh, well, that's probably true. I don't know corncob pipe, though. I didn't know they specifically picked on the poor corncob. I never had one. You smoke pipe after the poll.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
goats. Go.
So a couple of things that pop up, and a lot of people think of the Balkans and Romania as the origin of vampire lore, but it does go back. It's been around forever. One of the first vampire stories is Felonian, it's in.
Isn't that a monk?
No, that's Felonius, but
no, it's a tube, right?
Oh God. Anyway, actually, it's Philinonian. Sorry, Philinonian was a lady who was dead. Unfortunately.
No. You got to go. She's a lady.
I can't do the mix of Jerry Lewis and she's a lady. She's
Tom
a lady.
Jones.
Oh, Tom Jones. Thank you. Don't know why I blanked on Tom Jones.
Tom Jones and his Jones.
Philinonian. I can't pronounce it. It was a Greek.
Get on with your fallopian too.
She is. The story goes that a young man was visiting this family, and he kept seeing Philinonian, which was this lady that would pop up, and she would leave him trinkets, and they were exchanging gifts and all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden, one day, the matriarch of the family he was staying with came into the room, and he saw the woman and screamed, "You can't be here, you're dead." And sure enough, it was their daughter who had died. She'd gotten married and died 6 months after getting married. They buried her in a tomb and all of that stuff. And at first, the family thinks it's just an impersonator. So she runs off, she disappears, they never see her again. And she goes back, and they go back to the tomb saying, "We'll prove it was just an impersonator." They open the tomb, and of course the tomb is empty. And the trinkets they had buried her with are the trinkets that he had been getting. And the trinkets he exchanged with her out of kind of this romantic thing are all in the tomb now. And the story ends. That's how it ends. They realize that she was undead. A lot of people say, well, that's a ghost story. But actually, one of the first vampire, Goethe, or whatever, however you pronounce it, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, his vampire story, which predates Bram Stoker, he said that's a vampire. And the reason he based it on that was the Greeks and Romans did believe that if you were a spirit, you actually drained life, usually through blood, out of those that you were around. And so a lot of the vampirism things you can trace back to stories like that, because the only way you could get the gods of old, the Greek and Roman gods, to let you come back from the afterworld is if you would send them back lifeblood. And so there's some Greek and Roman things that way predate, obviously, Stoker's Dracula, that are like that. And so you see that variation continue across different cultures. So I wanted to bring that story up because if you go back and read it, a lot of people say, well, it's a ghost story. And a lot of experts say, well, the problem is, since the Greek and Romans believed that you had to give lifeblood to be out of the underworld, it sets up a lot of standards that we would later see adapted to the Romanian lore and everything that a lot of people know. So there you go.
So when we're talking about this, and I want to go back to, thank you for your history, but I want to go back to, do you think then it's something in our, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, DNA, that we're just attracted to this story? Does it all go back to a woman,
or is it just
her
a
sexuality? Simple... Because Dracula, I mean, I guess it is, he's preying on their sexuality, and oh my God, he can look at them and get them all Twitter-pated to come to him. Is it all about attacking a woman's sexuality?
No, I think it's a combination of that and the immortality aspect of it. Y'all never die.
Well, I think that's
never die.
Get it on and bang a gong.
Actually, clacked my teeth together. That hurt. Anyway,
aren't you used to grinding them anyway?
I am. Thank you for pointing out another one of my many, many flaws.
I do the same thing.
Bruxism, sir, is a problem. No, I think the other part about it is, so if you go back and look, and again, Stoker pulled in the vampire teeth and stuff like that, but none of that was in the mythology until about 100 years before he wrote it. A lot of the vampires, I mean, it never dealt with how they got the blood. They just had to get it. And actually, some of them didn't go after blood, and I'll do more history as we go along. But I think the question is valid. But I think the reason, if we go back and think about what people knew about blood and knew about things like that, I mean, you go back to the medical treatment of, we've got to make sure your humors are aligned. We've got to make sure you're all that stuff. I mean, all people understood was if you bled too much, you died. So blood was life. Going back to the Egyptians, linking it back to that, they pulled the brain out because you don't need a brain. You live because of your heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it. I think it was, you're not sexy if you're dead, and blood keeps you alive. I mean, and don't get me wrong, Joe, I'm not calling out your lifestyle, but I'm not.
It's a little harder these days.
Yeah, since it close to the COVID wards, that's terrible.
Make of that comment what you will.
But anyway, no, I think that's. I mean, again, you've got to put everything in its own time frame. But I think that, and I think the other thing is that if you look at other creatures, if you look at zombies are not attractive. They lose their, they start to fall apart. That's not hot.
Well, also go ahead, but also that also is with the depiction of them too, because there's so many different variations over the centuries. Like you were just talking about, the teeth thing didn't show up to 100 years pre-Stoker, yep. And let's be honest, Stoker stole from 3 or 4 different sources.
Right.
Stories that
aren't. At least.
I mean, I've got it pulled up, and we can talk about it in a few minutes when we get to the book, the actual book.
But I think the other part about it is, I mean, if you look at the folklore aspect of it, so before we even get to those other books, I mean, what people actually believed and became part of folklore, a couple of the creatures that fell into that, some of the variants, the Albanians had the Shatriga. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that.
Is that like Strigoi? Is that a
variation? And that's what I'm saying.
Offshoot of
you're going to see the terminology is similar because it all came out of kind of that Romanian region.
Right.
The Shatriga was, again, it was feminine. It was a vampiric witch is the closest they can translate it. But it turned into a flying creature, but only an insect. So that turning into something comes from that mythology. But they turned into an insect, oddly enough, usually a moth or a fly or a bee. And the 3 reasons for that was moths were considered a bad sign, flies gathered at the point of death, and bees spread life. They pollinated. They did other things. Unless
you're allergic to him, poor Macaulay Culkin.
He's just an actor, right? Like he posted on Twitter earlier today.
That is the most painful documentary I've ever seen.
Anyway, the interesting part about that folklore and what made it actually more terrifying than most of the vampires that we've seen on screen and in most popular novels is that the only way you could be cured is they had to willingly cure you.
Okay.
And they tended to look like, I love this, old to middle-aged women with gray, pale green, or pale blue eyes, which is actually called the Sibarda eyes. I don't know what that means. But
it's a great pizza place in the mall.
There you go. Anyway, the interesting part about this is some of the terminology we get, like evil eye and things like that, and the idea that vampires could control people comes from this mythology, because their stare could make people uncomfortable, and you couldn't look at them. So they had this Medusan type thing. If you looked at them, they could control you more or less. And the way you could get rid of them, either they had to cure you, but if you didn't want them to be able to infect you, again, going back to some mythology that we've all adapted to other purposes, you had to take a pinch of salt, close your eyes, and put salt on your eyes. I don't know. And then in your mouth, and then over your heart, and then over your stomach, anywhere that they could infect, basically.
So,
yeah.
Go finish your point.
And so and then you would throw it over your shoulder and all of that stuff. So their main target, though, were the people they could prey on the most, I guess I should say. They tended to go after men, but children. And so a lot of the mythology of things that prey on children are actually variations of this Shatriga. So that's the Albanian variation.
Okay.
And you've already mentioned the Strigoi. That's the Romanian variation of it. They were actually, though, they weren't considered they weren't considered vampires originally. They were actually just considered troubled spirits, is what that actually means.
So back to the whole female aspect of this that I find fascinating, and the punishment of of women's liberation and finding women's sexuality. Did you read anything about Lilith?
Yeah, I didn't read anything about it. I knew some stuff about it because Lilith has been used in comic books as a shorthand for vampires.
And Bordello of Blood.
Yeah, but going back to Morbius. Morbius's wife was named Lilith, and she's dead, and that's why he's trying to bring her back, which causes him to get infected, et cetera, et cetera. That's a character, Adam's first wife, that never gets mentioned again, conveniently.
I have to go back. That's something I need to do. Is it actually mentioned in the Bible?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. I don't remember.
But, and it's been, I'm not a biblical scholar, but
I'm not either.
I think one of the things that is made, and I don't know if I remember this from somebody trying to figure it out in a sermon or if it's actually, but Lilith was not made from him. And that's why they were incompatible.
Another book that deals with it is it's called Carmela.
That was one of the later ones. It only was about 40 years before he wrote.
Carmela is a story of a female vampire. It was the first story to have a female vampire as its protagonist. Now there's been some antagonist ones before that. Stoker does not have, even though we think of only Bram Stoker and Dracula when it comes to vampires. There was tons of these books and stories out before he ever had anything to do with it. It was written by Joseph Sheridan, and it came out in 1972, which would have been 25 years before Stoker.
Hold on. Let me, this is coming from biblical archaeology. For 4,000 years, Lilith has wandered the earth, figuring the mythic imaginations of writers, artists, and poets. Her dark origins lie in Babylonian demonology, where amulets and incantations were used to counter the sinister power of this winged spirit who preyed on pregnant women and infants. Lilith migrated to the world of the ancient Hittites, Egyptians,
Mesopotamians, and Sumerians. What's he doing? What's the bitch doing in my icebox?
Israelites.
We're working on that. If we could get together, I don't know, have dinner. I'd say Thursday at 9ish.
So
You want me to keep going?
no, Lilith next migrated to the world of the ancient Hittites, Egyptians, Israelites, and Greeks. She makes a solitary appearance in the Bible as a wilderness demon shunned by the prophet Isaiah. In the Middle Ages, she appears in Jewish sources as the dreadful first wife of Adam.
So Isaiah didn't like her, but he still mix her a drink? Because that's his job on the Love Boat. He best be mixing up a drink.
And,
Wait, that's Isaac.
And you all did joke, but the ancient name Lilith derives from a Sumerian word for female demons of wind spirits.
That makes Frasier all that more believable. That's an obscure joke for 5 of our listeners.
Well, so you talked about some of the other sources. I want to go way back. I'll jump back to the mythology in a second. But actually, as far as a literary device, vampires popped up in poetry because poetry used to be, novels were hard because you had to have monks write them over and over. But poetry was pretty common.
Gutenberg.
By the way,
Steve Gutenberg did all that.
Have we mentioned yet that because of James's education and background, he's our actual poet, Hugh Laurie? Off the top of my head, boom.
That was supposed to be a poet laureate thing, right?
I got it. Go back to your Gutenberg joke.
Sorry, I'm ashamed of that joke.
In 1773, which is quite a long time before Stoker
quite a long time.
Yeah, quite a long
time. Old English you do speak.
The narrative poem.
A long time.
The narrative poem, which means it tells a story.
It's a Boston song too.
Narrative poem.
Quite an old time. They couldn't fit it into the rhyme scheme.
Anyway,
I hope nobody's listening to this to learn something.
Well, I'm presenting history. I'm presenting history. Y'all just anyway. Oddly enough, also of interest to anybody that's an Edgar Allan Poe fan, the 1773 poem Lenore.
Fucking Nicolas Cage into this before it's over.
He was a vampire.
Vampires.
Anyway,
but you know what Nicolas Cage didn't do, Joe?
Save color out of space. Oh no!
No, bang his cousin and die in a ditch.
That's true.
Anyway, Lenore, which is not written by Edgar Allan Poe, but you probably can assume Edgar Allan Poe may have read this poem to get the origin of the name. Lenore was by Gottfried August Berger, and it is a narrative poem. And one of the lines that actually is quoted by Stoker directly in Dracula is, I'm going to get this wrong because it's in German, Den die Toten reiten schnell.
You should have done it with more anger.
I know. That's where my German goes wrong. I'm not angry enough. For the dead ride fast. It's taken directly from that poem, and it is basically a German poem exploring Lenore, who is an undead being that constantly has to seek a lover.
And what's the name of that? Can you email me that? I'd really like to read it.
Yeah, Lenore.
I'm not joking.
Lenore. Just pick up a Poe thing and go, oh, yeah, it was Lenore. He was talking about Lenore.
I'll be sitting there going, I can't find the damn thing written by the Raven.
As a late.
All I got was this book called Ka!
I kept waiting for Bang Bang.
Anyway, the
caw thing made me laugh. I don't know why.
Okay, I got where you're from. Anyway, there was another German.
Caw made me laugh.
Another German poem by Johannes Wolfgang von Goethe.
I'll just call him JP.
Yeah. Anyway, called "The Bride of Corinth" because Corinth is known for its leather. And it is also a vampire narrative poem. Here's an excerpt from it. From my grave to wander I am forced, still to seek the gods' long severed link, still to love the bridegroom I have lost, and the lifeblood of his heart to drink.
The lifeblood.
Listen, I am not known for my readings.
You teach
and
people.
I don't do it while reading from a book. I do it from knowledge stored up in my head.
Okay, point taken.
They pay you for that?
Pretty well, actually. I mean, it's okay. I mean, education faculty. I'm not engineering faculty, but I do okay. Anyway.
You have to be able to afford a six swing for your wife.
A six swing?
Sex swing is what I meant to say.
No, you didn't. Anyway, so those were all in, the 18th century, the 1700s. We get to the vampire by
Yeah.
1819. That's vampire with a Y, by the way.
Yes.
You know the history of that one. That's actually, I learned something doing this. I'd heard of the vampire
I
in
think Chad and I should
1819.
just go ahead and log off and let you finish this one out.
Chad said he was worried we didn't have enough history. This one I knew the story of the
We've
vampire.
known each other for 20 years.
The vampire, I knew the name, but I didn't know the history of it. It's actually tied to the writing of Frankenstein.
What?
1819, John William Polidori is part of a contest between Polidori, Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, and Percy Shelley to write the best horror story.
And Lord Byron had his pet bear.
And with the last 24 hours, this is the second time this instance has come up in conversation in my life.
About Mary Shelley?
About the actual of them, the competition. This is within 25 hours. This is the second time this has come up.
Right.
Well, here's the kind of side of that. So
did it really happen?
Yes.
Yes.
The competition? Yes.
And they were stoned out of their minds.
And it was
what were they
raining.
on?
The reason that it happened, the reason
I'm
that
being
it
serious.
happened was the weather was so bad. If you go back and look at this time, it was the weather was terrible. It wouldn't stop raining, and the temperature was lower than it should be in the summer. So they pretty much locked themselves up, or they weren't locked up, but they couldn't really travel easily. They couldn't do anything. So they said, well, you got to do something. And so they had a competition to see who could write something, because they were all, snobby rich people.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. They're all privileged.
Yeah,
I mean, it was like a whole weekend of a drunken stupor and whatever drugs they had back then, and then they said, "Oh, let's do this writing competition."
I'm not being facetious. I was wondering if it was mushrooms, hallucinogens.
I need to look into that. I don't remember what drugs it was.
But
I almost said barbiturates, and I'm like, wait, that's not true.
They were doing bennies. Bennies.
They were on bennies. The next question is, can I have some?
But this actually this may help you as far as the modern rope. Well, maybe.
Probably.
But as far as your question about when did they become sexy and all of that, the vampire is probably the first example of a sexy male vampire. Because the vampire is the story of the vampire, again with a Y, is that of Aubrey, a young Englishman, who meets Lord Ruthven, a man of mysterious origins who has entered London society. Aubrey accompanies Ruthven to Rome, but leaves him after Ruthven seduces the daughter of a mutual acquaintance. This goes on, and it's told first person. If you read The Vampire, you may look at Stoker a little bit differently because it's told first person.
Yeah.
He seduces women. He, drinks their blood and all of that stuff. And then
that's James's and all that.
Yeah, that's all that. He does that stuff.
Etc. and all that stuff.
The difference is he seduces two women at once. Like, Dracula preyed on him, finished him, and then moved on. No. He seduced the sister of somebody as he went. Like, it was like, I've got your sister, and I'm going to get her too.
I like this guy.
And I'm just going to use a different name. I'll be Lord Ruthven here. Over there, I'll be, I don't know, Charles or something. The sister ends up driving the sister to a nervous breakdown, and then does all this stuff. On the wedding night, I'm skipping ahead because I know y'all don't care about the details.
All this stuff.
On the wedding night, of course, the bride is discovered dead. And drained of all blood, and Lord Ruthven has vanished. And that's the end of the novel. Like, he's out there. He's free. He's good to go. And that's a character that if you like vampire fiction, you've probably seen pop up in some places if you read a lot, because everybody looks for a Dracula reference. But it's a shorthand to see how big of a vampire fan you are. If there's Anno Dracula, the novel series is, if Dracula was real and he took over America, or he came to America and did all that stuff. There was an Anno Dracula series, and Lord Ruthven becomes the Prime Minister of England.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the vampire, you don't get why that's so significant. He's always been out there, and he predates Dracula. Another precursor, and this is the one I said I would tell you where the teeth thing comes from. This has to be the worst name now for a vampire work. I'm talking, of course, Varney the Vampire. Know what I mean, Vern?
Seriously?
Varney, yeah, look at Varney the Vampire. It's the longest, during this time period, longest vampire novel. The reason for that was there's two different authors that's credited for it. It was done as it was a Penny Dreadful type thing. They just published a chapter a week, but they got paid by the word or by the page.
Oh.
And so it ends up being the most recent printing of it was still 876 pages for the modern update of it. The important part about this is it follows Sir Francis Varney, who goes through different things, and it actually creates the first sympathetic vampire. He doesn't like the fact he's a monster. Now, he still preys on women. Don't get me wrong. He's going to do that. But at one point, he throws himself into Mount Vesuvius trying to kill himself. He does all these things, and he dies multiple times in it, and they always bring him back. As a matter of fact, at one point, they bring him back like Frankenstein. They electrocute him.
So
the important part about that is, real quick though, is it was the first one to actually talk about the fangs. It was the first one to say they had sharpened fangs, and that's how they drained the blood. Because before that, Lord Ruthven looked like anybody else, except he was, attractive. He didn't look like me.
Well, that's another interesting part. So let's skip ahead a little bit to the book. He was not attractive in the book. He's a big, furry kind of guy.
Well, and that goes back to, so a lot of the mythology, and you mentioned the Strigoi. If you go back to that, the Strigoi also were kind of werewolves. And so there was this overlapping, and because Dracula does transform into bats is what we normally think of because of the movies, but he also does wolves.
Yeah.
Children of the Night, what music they make. And if you read the full history of the Strigoi, they were originally troubled spirits who had issues with the grave. They could transform into animals. They could become invisible. Again, a lot of stuff, mist and stuff like that Stoker used. But the actual cases, quote unquote, that are documented of actual Strigois come from, the 1500s and 1600s. And if you're really interested in this, the medical records, I put that in quotes because we would not say these were overly great medical records. But the way they actually treated these people, there was a Carnelian scientist, Jonas Vauxhard Valsvor, and he actually wrote about how they had to get rid of them, doing things like, taking them apart, cutting their hearts in half, stuffing their mouths full of garlic, things that would, again, show up in that. But they tended to actually be more associated with witches and warlocks, but they had more of the animal tendencies. And then the one that had a much more like Stoker talked about, the other mythology he pulled from, and I'm going to get this, this is again going to be mispronounced, but it's Greek. It's Verocalus, which were also called the Ballroom Caucus. And the Verdugo.
Do you mind saying that again after you okay? So you cleared your throat. So what was the word?
The Verocalus. Brykaolakas. These were undead creatures that, again, they took on animal thing. The interesting part about them is they didn't just drink blood; they actually ate flesh, and their favorite thing to eat were livers. But they were known to be, getting to your point about Stoker's description of Dracula, they were extremely furry, hairy, and they got linked in a lot of ways to these ideas of what we would now consider werewolfism. And they were not overly attractive. And this is, I think he describes Dracula in this way. This is a description of somebody that, quote unquote, witnessed a Verocalus in history. They were known to be roaming about, and let's see, they looked fresh, so they weren't decaying, but they were gorged with new blood, so they were really puffy, and they were ruddy complected, facial hair, all of that stuff. As a matter of fact, the story about that, and again, this goes to Dracula. Dracula couldn't come in. Vampires can't come in unless they're invited. That's actually a variation of the Verocalus. The Verocalus, and there are still some areas of Greek societies where they still do this.
Well, did James just describe a Care Bear?
If you knock on a door,
knock on our door,
and you answer after one knock. So if you hear knock and you answer immediately, they can come in.
But if you knock, that's heaven's door.
That's exactly right. Actually, if they knock, if nobody responds immediately, they lose some of their power.
Oh.
And so, again, these are actual historical things again, belief systems that people documented that we see pop up in Stoker. And so, as Joe was saying, he pulled.
I don't remember what the hell I was saying.
You were talking about the fact that he wasn't the charismatic Lothario.
He's not attractive, no, as far as the description. And another thing that's slightly bullshit.
So, and I know we're going to talk about this in part 2. So even Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, he doesn't look like that. Isn't how he's described in the book either.
No,
he's very Hungarian.
There's a few. Yeah, he's a big furry Hungarian with a big mustache. The thing that that the new series, and we'll talk about this later, that on the Netflix series got right, sort of, is the baby. There's a scene in it, not that they turns a baby into a vampire, but that they ate babies, right? Most of them, because and we'll talk about this more with well, we might as well talk about it now a little bit, is that the movie is basically the stage adaptation. Every kind of Dracula movie you see was really the stage adaptation that was very popular that became the movie. It's not an adaptation of Bram Stoker's book as much as it was as a stage play.
Which is why Bela Lugosi, because he'd already been doing it on stage.
Right. So one of the things I always find fascinating that I found, and I didn't know this much, is, when you're doing the history of how Bram Stoker wrote the book, what was Bram Stoker interested in, there's a couple of things that I find fascinating. The first thing is that, so for years, I read a book in 7th or 8th grade, a little bit about the history and the making and about Bram Stoker writing the book. And this is maybe what they now think is pretty much bullshit, is that it's...
You read a book, Chad. He read a book.
And then it's actually based on Vlad the Third, by the way, which was Vlad II was Dracul, dragon, and Dracula is son of the dragon. That's where
Vlad Tepes.
Vlad Tepes, right. Vlad the Impaler. So a lot of people think that that's where it was based on. And there's actual evidence that was 2 lazy researchers in 1970, and pop culture just took hold of that.
Right.
That a lot of what this comes from is that, according to Dracula's Sense of Nonsense by Elizabeth Miller, Stoker read a book about Wallachia. I'm not for sure how to pronounce it. I apologize, everybody. It did not mention Vlad III. Stoker was struck by the word Dracula. He wrote it in his notes. And in Wallachian language means devil. And it therefore is likely that Stoker just chose the name because the character for Dracula for the world's most devilish associations. Do you find that fascinating?
Well, I was going to say, and one of the things you have to keep in mind is what was going on.
Because the actual Vlad Tepes never, ever presided in Transylvania, to their knowledge.
Well, yeah, and if you
and
look
he never lived in that castle. When you go to Transylvania, that they say it's just a cool-looking castle. He never, to most historians agree, he never stepped foot there.
And I mean, and honestly, too, in terms of history, he is such a minor character in the grand scheme of history.
He wouldn't even exist if it hadn't been. We wouldn't even be talking about it if it wasn't for Dracula and Bram Stoker,
right?
And the connection.
Yeah, he impaled people, but honestly, there was tons of people impaling at that time. So
and they were all fighting the Ottomans.
Right.
This is all about war.
Because they really wanted to rest their legs.
But did you guys know that? I found
whole empire of them.
Yeah, lazy
and I didn't really know. I just kind of accepted that, but it turns out it's mainly just bullshit.
Yeah, I was honestly, I just accepted the fact that Dracula was Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler.
So Google it. There's another interesting article that Time magazine did, and I can't sit here and read it all. But the problem is that it's really detailed. So James. And I'm picking on James instead of you, Chad, just simply because James says he's read books. And you and I have.
Not all of them. There's a lot of them.
Bram Stoker claimed that parts of Dracula
I can do a highlights magazine.
Here's what we know about the story behind the novel. And this is by Dacre Stoker and J.D. Barker. Now, if you think, oh my God, they have the same last name. Yes, it is a descendant. In summer of 1890, sorry, that wouldn't have been too far away, a 45-year-old Bram Stoker entered the subscription library in Whitby, England, and requested a specific title, The Accounts and Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson.
Which gets used in a lot of references, Moldavians.
Moldavians.
Well, that's a cool word. From the museum, Bram then made his way to Whitby Harbor, where he spoke to several members of the Royal Coast Guard. They provided details of a sailing vessel.
Can I cut you off?
Yeah.
If you say the word again, You have to say it like this. Whippy!
What?
Command me, Lord.
Sounds like he's saying in the library. Whippy!
Whoopee.
Go ahead.
The vessel, it was the Dimitri, not the Demeter, that ran
Oh.
aground a few years earlier on the beach inside the protective harbor. Only a handful of the remaining crew alive. The ship, which originated in Varna, an Eastern European port, was carrying a mysterious cargo. Can you guys guess what that cargo was?
Dead people
Crates of earth.
with dead people.
They saw, when they were investigating, they saw a large black dog consistent with a Yorkshire myth of a beast known as Barghest escape from the hull.
Be
Mhm.
our guest.
Be
Our
our
guest.
Right.
If we sing anymore, we'll get sued.
So basically, he had breakfast 4 months earlier with a guy at a beefsteak club in Lyceum Theater, and his friend Arminius Vambry told him of the book, which is about this Wallachian language and the devil. And he basically took a lot of stuff that he'd been thinking of and molded them all together. And it kind of all came together over several months.
Well, I was going to say it, and one of the
From
things,
what they can tell from his journal. Now, Bram Stoker also said that several parts of this book were real and based on some real people.
there's also,
I don't know if he was a good salesman or if he actually believed it, or if these people. Well, it's like ghosts. So I won't. Two out of the three boneheads don't believe in ghosts. I won't go ahead and say which of the other one is. But
I really wish I could have a ghost appear behind me and be like, "Hi, Chad!"
And I've been told many ghost stories. The three of us have been told many ghost stories. I have a lot of people, a lot of friends, a lot of acquaintances who believe in ghosts, and they always tell me, I was like, well, if you were only there. And I never doubt their sincerity and their honesty. I don't doubt that they don't believe. Make sense to you? So I wonder if he believed these people.
Well, and I was about to say, and
stories or something.
One of the things, if you do listen to Lore, the podcast, and there's actually an Amazon episode where they made it as a show for a while, and they have it acted out. Mercy,
it's still a show, James.
Well, no, that they're not getting a third or fourth season.
Oh,
whichever
they're not.
season now is.
Okay.
But it probably still exists.
Well, yeah, but you won't get
Mercy.
new ones. But Mercy, was her name Mercy? I want to say Mercy Brown was the first American vampire, quote unquote.
No, it was Murphy Brown.
No, it was not. It was Ira. Ira would have put an end to that. Would have staked her. Anyway, it's Mercy is the first name. But if you watch the episode, and I do recommend, if you have Amazon Prime, watch Lore.
I would love to. I've never gotten around to it.
The historian that does that, or that he's now got a team of historians that work for him, but he started on his own. This is, by the way, Lord Joe, that's a podcast that, unlike this one, is successful.
It's successful.
I mean,
they've shorter. A lot shorter.
Not
is
some
it really?
of them.
How
Some
short
of them. Some of them are a little bit long.
30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah,
But
well, you know
anyway.
what Lore isn't? This will piss off Lore. Joe Rogan.
I'm sure.
I'm sure. I think Aaron Minke's okay with that.
Yeah, he's fine. But anyway, you said it was based on actual people. The actual story, so I don't want to rehash it because you really should look into this.
It's made of people.
But the tuberculosis was going around killing people, right?
Yeah.
And
Chad
there,
just shot himself in the head.
a lot of people died.
And we heard nothing.
Mike was muted.
He used a silencer. He's a zombie.
No, I'm a Dracula. Blah, blah, blah.
I need you to put an ER on the end of that, sir. When you
Dracula.
He's a Dracula.
Anyway,
Blah, blah, blah.
they were considered the first one. And the reason I bring that up is the news copy, because the family was finally convinced by this old world person to dig up the body because it was believed that she was preying on the family members and that's why they were dying. Again, we know now that's called the spread of germs. But because she was buried during the winter, she looked very much still alive, like she had not started to decay. And so it started the mythology. Stoker did have news clippings about her case in his files. So that may have been what he was saying when it was.
There are several. Well, he says Harker and Mina and a couple Van Helsing are based on real people, according to this Time article. Like I said, Google it, look it up.
Well, and I was about to say, if I go back,
I'll send you the link. But I want to get to another part of it as well that I found fascinating, is that Dracula is abridged. Their editor cut a lot of Dracula before they'd publish it. And I want to talk to you. Do you guys know this?
No.
Okay, cool. What do you mean I can't minimize? Sorry.
You will not minimize me, sir.
Why not? People have been doing it years.
Well, that's true.
Did not intend to Dracula to serve as fiction, but as a warning of very evil. I don't know that I agree with that. But because of his editor did not want to present the work as a true story. So Otto Killam of Archibald, Constable and Company returned the manuscript with a single word, no. He went on to explain that London was still recovering from a state of horrible murders that were happening in this one place. James, you want to take a guess where it was?
Would that be Whitechapel, Joe?
That's right. And the last thing we wanted to do
Why did James have to guess that? I know Whitechapel.
He was there. He was there when it happened.
Where have you been, sir, for the last 120 years?
You ever see that Star Trek episode with Red Jack in it?
I was going to say I got one of those long-lasting cases of chlamydia.
They couldn't publish such a story without running the risk of generating mass panic. The novel was finally released on May 26th, and the first 101 pages had been cut. And numerous alterations had been made to the text. An epilogue had been shortened, changing Dracula's ultimate fate as well as that of his castle, and tens of thousands of words had vanished. So in the 1980s, the original Dracula manuscript was discovered in a barn in rural northwestern Pennsylvania. Did you guys aware of any of this? Nobody knows how it made its way across there, but do you know who bought it and owned it at the time of his death? Paul Allen. And actually, where it starts on page 102 in Dracula, Jonathan Harker's Journey on the Train, that's actually 102 pages into it. So that's in the thick of it. What was the first 101 pages and what was considered too real and too frightening for publication? Now, there's parts of it that were published with other books. So, for example, hold on for 1 second. Iceland title was Macht Merkrana, or Power of Darkness, and with the first edition, Brand left not only his original preface intact, but parts of the original story outside the reach of the UK publisher. So depending on where you were getting the book, if it was outside of the reach of the UK publisher, it had the other parts of the story intact. But I wasn't aware of any of this either. What about you all?
Well, I was about to say...
Not that that's unusual. It happens all the time. I mean, Stephen King's The Stand was shortened by 300 or 400 pages. But you can find the extended. I own it. It's over there on a shelf. We know about it. It's because it's recent history. But don't you think the three gentlemen here now talking should have known about this? Does it seem odd?
Well, my entire thing is, the more I learn about the mythology, the less impressed I am with Stoker in general.
But he is
he amped it up.
Tarantino of his day, and what I mean by that is he took existing cliches or genres, put them together into some sort of blender that works and is entertaining as hell.
Well, I was going to say, and so you mentioned Carmela earlier, and Carmela was, by the way, if you're not aware, Carmela predated.
Is it Camilla? It's Camilla.
It's Carmela. It's
Carmela. No, I'm talking about Gonzo's.
Yeah. But Carmela, which Joe referenced earlier, was a big deal because she also was it was never obviously flat out said because of the time period it was written. It predated Dracula by 20 years, 1872. But she was a lesbian vampire.
She's a lesbian. Yeah, that was
she preyed on women. But the interesting part about that is that a lot of the pieces that later on Stoker used, who is she being hunted by? She's being hunted by Baron Vardenberg, which is it was Dr. Helsing. And all of that. So, I mean, a lot of the tropes, he played with tropes, but you're right. Quentin Tarantino-ish. He took the tropes.
And I'm not taking anything away from Bram Stoker Tarantino. It's just if you're a fan of Tarantino, you know that he's a fantastic filmmaker, fantastic writer. He just takes things and puts them in a blender, and you see them through Tarantino's eyes, and that makes it extremely entertaining as a point of view. Like with most great filmmakers, it makes it wonderful to watch. I love Tarantino movies. I'm not knocking Tarantino before anybody gets pissed. Just saying, over here's Mr. White, Mr. Pink, Mr. Blue was used 20-some years ago in a little movie called Chad.
It's called Chad?
No, I never heard of it.
Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3.
I know.
6. You had 1, 2, and 3 at 6.
But unless, I didn't know that for years.
No,
I didn't know it for years until I finally saw Taking a Pelham 1, because I never watched it till I was older. I knew Reservoir Dogs.
But, one of the things, and so you're talking about the Hungarian appearance of the way he's described as being foreign and everything. Something that is lost on a lot of modern readers, and like I said, we'll get to our favorite adaptions in the next episode. But when Dracula came out, it was also read in a way we don't read it now. And it's a way we don't read it now because we are trained not to read it that way, as we should be.
Which is?
It was to warn you about foreigners.
Yeah, probably.
It would. No, let me give you an example.
His great blah 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 talks about his warning of evil.
Dr. Gordon wrote an article. I don't have his first name, sorry, but he says you can look at this, and people at the time that would have read it would have picked up on this. When he meets the brides, when the brides come out. Near the beginning of the novel, these two themes are seemingly spawned together with the introduction of the so-called Brides of Dracula. By analyzing the brides in their introduction as well as their other appearances, one can see that Stoker's ideas on the fear of Eastern immigration and the way women would be treated are intertwined and should be viewed as such. And in juxtaposing these brides with Western women found later in the novel, Mina Harker and Lucy Westernada, anyway, it can be said that Stoker's viewed Victorian women as already withholding radical traits of the new woman, and that Eastern immigration simply brings these traits to the forefront in the form of the risk of new women. And if you read the description of the brides, quote, this is from Stoker's text.
I think we call it today strange.
2 of the brides were dark and had high aquiline noses, like the Count. They were masculine, like the Count. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Thus, 2 of the 3 brides contain physical traits linking them to the embodiment of the novel's easternmost evil, Dracula. So this idea of the urging of evil, it would have been read at the time by the people who were paying attention to that sort of thing as saying, we should fear foreigners. Foreigners are going to come and they're going to take our women and they're going to make our women their women, and we can't have that. And so I'm not saying we should read that now. One of the great things about literary analysis is we can take a work that is dated and quite frankly, if we still read it that way, that makes it not effective. We now read Dracula differently, and that's fine. But I think it's important to step back and say that Stoker was also, he wouldn't have been pro-immigration, let's put it that way.
Probably not, no.
Mm-hmm.
He was of a certain class that feared immigration.
Absolutely. And not much has changed in 140 years. Boy, we ever got silent. All right, then fine. We won't talk about politics.
Xenophobia.
Xenophobia. That's where you're afraid of xenomorphs. Them damn aliens ain't coming to take my baby.
Well, they did.
I was going to say you're a fear of warrior princesses.
No, I don't have any fear of them. They can tackle me anytime. More silence.
More silence.
No, I don't have anything to add other than it is important to know that if you read the work and you think about the fear of foreigners and you approach it that way, you'll notice a lot of stuff in there about his thoughts on people from outside of his group.
Well, in Dracula, the novel's also written, and James, can you talk a little bit about it as far as the letters? That was but wouldn't that be coming towards the end of the popularity of writing a book in letter form?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things,
when did that end becoming a popular way of doing it? What do you call that?
Well, I think sorry,
I love putting him on the spot. James, tell me that you learned something.
Come on, Hugh Lower.
A lot.
All right, it wasn't funny that first, but it was funny the second. I don't know why, but it was.
It's a joke that builds up over time.
Yeah, just like Hugh Laurie.
Yeah.
So that is
It's never lupus.
He's a good musician. He's a good musician. If you could see Hugh Laurie and his band live,
there is a tradition, as Joe is right, and they're often referred to as I hate this word.
Frankenstein is written the same way.
I hate this, epistolary. Epistolary, which means it's told through documents, so letters, etc.
And Dracula, I mean, Frankenstein was written the same way too.
And there's all sorts of them. I mean, it goes back to Sir Charles Grandison. It goes back to, so it's not. It wasn't just a horror trope or anything.
I can see James on the screen twice.
You're having a stroke. That's called double vision.
Now Chad can see him twice. He's right over Chad's shoulder. Sorry.
Anyway, I'm your conscious, Chad. Kill. Anyway,
done.
Anyway, no. So yeah, it was an epistolary novel told through documents, and you're right. I mean, that Sir Charles Grandison, I think, was. I'm trying to actually find out when that work came out because it was old. I mean, I had to read.
It's the early
1753. 1753 was, and that's an example.
We're talking 140 years later.
Yeah. So, but it was also one of those things that, much like people now, will pull back. You know, well, we talked about Tarantino. Tarantino did a throwback to something 30,
so would that have been a
years
throwback in 1890?
It would have given you a certain amount of clout. You know what I'm saying? Like it was like, no,
I've never had it, but I've heard other people.
He's writing in the epistolary fashion, much like the blah, 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 the greats of the time, and that's one of the things. Like I mentioned, Sir Charles Grandison. Has anybody besides me read that particular work?
Nope.
No.
Don't. It's a terrible. By the way, Sir Charles Grandison. Just
hold on,
quick
James.
To set this up.
Done and done.
Sir Charles Grandison.
I'll put it in my queue.
His last name is Grandison. Do you want to know something about him? Everything he does
the phrase grandiose.
Everything he does is great, and it's a romance, and it's Sir Charles, and it's it's not my cup of tea. I read it for a British lit course that I took to be an English teacher, and I didn't do that for too long. That being said, I do know a lot about epistolary novels. So yeah, that's the one that came to mind, and there's some I think. Fielding's Tom Jones uses some of that. So yeah, Joe's absolutely right. That was in fashion, but it was a way to harken back to something that was before by the time Stoker did it. So you're right though. It would have been old hat for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's a curious thing to me. Like you were talking about, so looking at things historically through that time, through that eyeglass, through that period, and I clearly don't have an expert here, no offense to any of the three of us, but I thought I'd ask you because I was curious to see, wouldn't that have been old hat then? So
yeah, I mean, it would have been.
I need to talk to somebody about that who would know more than us because clearly we shouldn't be talking about that.
No, I mean, I don't know the pure lineage of it, but yes, if you want to know, I had enough English training to teach high school English, and I think I actually can do pretty well still at that. But that is not. I can't give you the full history of the epistolary novel.
So, the book
Chad, epistolary. Epistolary. Chad.
The book was a little chopped up. Wasn't exactly what he wrote. What we think of as far as the movie, specifically when we're talking about the Universal horror film Dracula, and by the way, that's not when we do episode 2. I'm assuming Chad's on the same boat I am. That is actually not where I want to start.
Nope.
Right?
Right.
We're going to get Deutsch up in here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be a little more interesting. We all agree, though, most people, when they think of Dracula, who haven't read it, they're thinking of the stage play that was really famous.
Yeah, and let's go back to why is Dracula and vampires the most popular? Because I've been thinking
why
about
is Dracula most out of all the vampires. Why do we drag? Because we just rattled off 5 or 6 throughout history.
Because he's the biggest in terms of pop culture. Even then, I mean, the book was huge. I mean, it's what started. I mean, there had been stories before, but what?
I was making a joke. It wasn't funny.
Oh, but no. Do you think the reason why Dracula and vampires themselves are so worshipped is because in reality they're the most human?
Yeah.
I mean, for example, Mary Shelley's version of Frankenstein is pretty much human. But now we're all we now envision him with the big green hat, the big green head.
My Dracula is next to my Frankenstein.
Yeah, Wolfman.
Walmart's.
Wolfman's a dog. I mean, granted, furries are big now, so maybe he might get a resurgence. But
well, I think the thing is though is I think you're right. I think that if I became a vampire today, I'd be shocked as hell. But on top of that,
you've already got the pale thing going.
So. Well, and I'm working on the Good Widow's.
And you've already got the furry and Hungarian and big mustache. This is for the folks who listen and don't watch.
Yeah.
They're going to be shocked.
Actually, what they don't know is I have a Dr. Robotnik mustache that actually comes off my face. Anyway, I think you're right, though, Chad. I think it's because if I become a wolf man, I'm human most of the time, but when I'm not human, I'm complete. Nobody's going to mistake me.
And you don't have control over your actions.
You don't have control. You're a killing machine.
The Invisible Man, he has this great power, but he's not seen. He's an unseen force.
You can't see the Invisible Man?
You shot the Invisible Man.
I said Invisible Man.
I got it. I
can't see the Invisible Man.
But I really think that's probably where Dracula and the vampires are so popular, is just because they're the only ones that are recognizable.
Well, it's real.
In terms of when you look in a mirror, granted, can't see yourself in a reflection, but
if we're getting close to wrapping up, I want to say one thing that the great filmmaker, well, he's a good filmmaker. He made my favorite werewolf film of all time, John Landis. And this story was told by Max Landis. Yeah. And I don't know if I've told you, I'm sure I have before. Max Landis, when he was a child, is a screenwriter. Well, he was a screenwriter. I don't know what he's doing now. Seems he got a little trouble a couple of years ago. But Max Landis, when he was a child, said he was asking his father, John Landis, who directed American Werewolf in London, and an underrated vampire movie I like quite a bit called Innocent Blood.
Uh-huh.
So I think it was about vampires. Why can't a vampire do this? And why can't a vampire do that? Now, I want you to think of a man looking at his, let's say, 9-10-year-old son, asking him his questions. He goes, all right, you want to know why? They can do anything. They can, Dad? Yeah, why? Because it's all fucking make-believe. But it answers every question that we have as far as why can't they look in a mirror? Why can they look in a mirror? Why can they not look at crosses? Because you just make it up. And whatever the rules that you make up in your particular story, you follow and people will follow. They get pissy when you break the rules set in your own story. So if your story is vampires can sit there and shave, then people will believe it. Agreed, gentlemen?
Yeah.
As long as you don't break that rule. So, for example, we can get into Anne Rice. Anne Rice, there's even a great line. Well, I'm assuming, I think I read the book. I can't remember. I own the book. I'm pretty sure. He says, I'm awfully fond of looking at crosses.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's one of the things about, and again, I think Chad's right. I think it's because they are the most human monsters. And I think it also gets to I just saw your message. No matter how good of a person you are, no matter how holy you may be, we all have these compulsions, right? Like, this may shock you. I've been known to overeat. And so, we all have these things that pop up and that we may do and that we have a tendency to. And I think that, mine's not drinking blood, but I do enjoy a pizza.
You lost me.
So I think you're right. It lets us.
Can we do a movie called Blood and Pizza?
About $7. Oh yeah, it'll be great. Here's the plot to Blood and Pizzas. Let's write this right now. Okay, see, there's this guy. We'll call him, I don't know, Eduardo. Eduardo owns a pizza shop, becomes a vampire, and he starts mixing blood in with the sauce, and it gets really popular. But then he can't serve garlic anymore on the pizza, you see, because he's a vampire. And we'll just have larks. It'll be a good time.
Tricky.
Yeah. So what do? But he starts mixing in blood with the sauce, and that's Blood and Pizza. Literally, short film. Pay us to make it. We'll have it on your desk within a week.
But you can make up your own rules, and everybody has borrowed and cheated the whole time throughout the centuries for vampires up until Chad's right. Dracula. Dracula is the most recognizable. It's the one we always follow. It's the one that most people on the street, if you stop them and you start asking them rules about vampires, they got it from where? Dracula.
Well,
and they didn't get it from the book.
No.
They got it from the movie.
Because he didn't have all these weaknesses in the book, right?
Not a lot of, I don't think, I mean, he could walk in the day. I think that's the one thing that Coppola's version gets right is he can walk in the daytime. He just doesn't have as much power, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he's weakened.
He's weakened during the day.
Which means he's more like us. That's a commentary in of itself, right? If he's in the sun, he's like us. He's weaker. He's not to again borrow from Quentin Tarantino, but that line from Kill Bill, Clark Kent is Superman's commentary on humanity. Dracula in the Daylight is Stoker's commentary on us.
Yeah. I agree with Chad to a certain extent. It's probably vampires in general are the most overused creature of all time. And as much as we try to explain why we love them and why we are attracted to them and why Dracula is still so obviously important to pop culture. I mean, we just got a huge Netflix 3-part series. It was almost 6 hours. Well, it was 5 hours long. And for the most part, 4 hours and a half of it didn't suck.
Right.
Just like the last 20 minutes. God bless America. What a shitstorm.
But do you think possibly that one of the reasons is exactly what you've already said? It can be what we want it to be.
I guess.
I love, and I'll talk about this later, I don't want to give anything away, but how many times have we seen vampire films where they don't suck blood, but they take something else? Where you have this element of, because even going back...
Well, they take the life force or something.
Yeah, they do something. I mean, there's even an Edgar Allan Poe story, which again predates Stoker, where it's the man is painting his wife's portrait and paints the life out of her. Like the painting, because when the narrator discovers this castle, goes in the castle to stay because him and his servant don't have anywhere to shelter. And when they go into the castle, he's attracted to this one room where there's this beautiful portrait of this woman, and he's captivated by it. And then he finds journals or something. It's been a while since I've read the story, but he finds it's the artist's notes, and it's the old lord of the manor. And he literally, as he painted his wife, he noticed she was getting sicker and sicker, but he couldn't stop. He was compelled, and the painting drew the life, which we see the reverse of when we get to Oscar Wilde Portrait of Dorian Gray. But so I mean, even before, that's not a vampire story unless you want to say the painting was vampiric in some nature. It's a really great, compelling story in its own right. But yeah, I think that's why we do get it. You can adapt it however you want. I mean, how many times have we seen stories where, I have the ability to heal people, but then that has to be paid somehow else? Is that a vampiric nature? Well, it can be if we want it to be. Yeah. So I think you're right. We can adapt it to be whatever we want it to be. And, you can have...
Well, we do that with all monsters.
Yeah. I mean... But I think it's easiest with vampires because you don't have to play logic. Like, in theory, if you read Frankenstein was at its best trying to actually use somewhat medical science, right? Like, we do know there's pulses. We do know there's electric. We can kind of... Dracula's not worried about that. Stoker doesn't stop halfway through going, let me walk you through the science of how this... No, it's superstition, and that's fine, and we let it run because it's a heck of a story.
Yeah.
We'll forgive anything if you give us a good enough story. Just like for years, I've been believing that Chad, isn't really a demon.
I don't think coming in my
dream. I'm telling you, it's liver failure. These eyes are yellow because of liver failure.
Stop coming into my dreams at night.
It's called jaundice. It's called jaundice.
Leave me be. Leave me be, demon Chad. Leave me be.
I'll get your soul.
Listen, it's already double mortgaged.
All right, guys, we about ready to wrap it up.
You don't look this good if you don't give something away, Chad.
So I do want to end this episode on a very Dracula related note. Also, it's bringing back something we talked about at the beginning. So let me just go with it. Shall we?
Are you going to play the Transylvania Twist?
Do I need to change the speaker view? Get us too.
Crusaders working overtime, fighting crime, secret rangers who will neutralize soon as they arrive. Tracker's gonna lead a mission, and Spectrum's got such supervision. This is the mighty power that can save the day.
By the way, that had 2,789,000 some views, which is more views than this show will ever get. Total.
Well, correct, sir. Now that he used mask theme song.
You know what's great about?
Hey,
Overtime
you wanted to make it a mask.
What'd you say?
You wanted to make it a mask episode. I made it a mask episode.
You know what's great about
Shout out
that?
to Jared Greer, by the way, for texting me, or was it Facebook? No, it might have been Facebook. I think it was because James put something maybe under it about giving us shit. It was like calling us dipshits for not going up to his place so that we could look at all the toys we mentioned in our obscure 80s episode.
Yeah, no.
He owned them all.
Hey, you know what's great about that mask theme, Chad?
Yeah.
It's smoking. See, that's another Masks show that had a cartoon. But see, the kids today, they'll appreciate my reference. They have no idea what the hell I'm talking about.
Well, they don't know him that way. They just know him as fighting Sonic the Hedgehog and drawing angry portraits of our president.
By the way, real quick, I know we were getting ready to wrap up. Sonic was way better than it had any right to be. I enjoyed that.
That's the review everybody gives it.
Oh man, I'm sorry, Chad. Cover your ears if you need to. Mario Brothers sucks, but Sonic was a delight. I mean, like I said, don't rush out and watch it. But if you gotta watch something with your kids, like even Dana laughed a couple times, and she hates Joy.
Yeah, I guess Adam Sandler called him up during the movie to thank him for it being funny.
Oh my!
Because he was watching it with his kids or something.
Yeah, I literally.
Jim Carrey up. Adam Sandler was watching the movie while he called Jim Carrey up.
Oh my God!
Complimented him.
At first, I was like, I don't know. I mean, Jim Carrey. I like Jim Carrey. I just didn't think of him as a robot. And the way he plays him, and he even said he usually doesn't do sequels. He goes, I'd play him again. It's fun to pretend you have a triple-digit IQ and still can't relate to anybody. And he goes, and it's also the most acting I've ever done. But I had a blast with it. So Sonic, it's not going to change the way you see film. But as far as video game adaptions, it's right up there with Silent Hill. Two very different movies, by the way.
I don't know. I had a blast, laughed my ass off. That one guy with that triangle head. Anyway, so to wrap it up.
He ain't going to fit in that elevator.
This is episode 1. This is the history of Dracula. Episode 2 is going to be some of our favorite and least favorite Dracula movies. Least favorite.
We got to put least favorites because I will tell you both. I have a doozy.
That you don't like that other people like?
No. Just a doozy of a Dracula.
I have them all pulled up. I was looking at them earlier today. All right. Thank you so much for listening to Bonehead. Share us, and we are out.
Ah.